Hey everyone, welcome to Outside the Walls. My name is John White.
I'm Casey McDonald.
And today we have Philip Baird with us. Philip is the campus minister for the Cloverdale Church of Christ. He's been there for the last 2.5 years now, and he's working on a Master in Arts and Christian Ministry at the Harding School of Theology, right?
That's right. Yep.
Welcome,
it's good
Philip.
to be here.
Yeah,
Thanks,
welcome.
guys.
Welcome.
So, we're excited to have Philip on the show today. And Philip, you have a lot of experience with the college age group.
That's right. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what's the general feeling on campus throughout this whole pandemic? Kind of how has this impacted everybody on campus, just in a general way?
Yeah. So one of the great things about college students is the younger you are, you have that optimism and idealism, right? And so that makes you super adaptable, which is a blessing in situations like this, right? So it's kind of a 3-stage for the freshmen. Like, they don't know anything different, and so they're just kind of rolling with the punches. The sophomores and juniors, they wish it was different, but they're willing to kind of work with it. I think it's been hardest on the seniors for sure, watching these last fly by. But in general, I think there's a lot of optimism that we're seeing the end hopefully around the corner, and they've been able to adapt and do a lot of good things despite all the restrictions. So
yeah, I felt bad for the seniors because it was like pandemic hit and everything just vanished, dried up. All the activities, everything that they enjoy, club stuff. That was crazy.
Yeah. So I guess you were doing campus ministry even before pandemic.
Yes.
So how has your role changed, or how have you seen your ministry change?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for my role, in a lot of ways, I do a lot of outreach and recruiting, but also coordinate the Bible classes and try to do a lot of events to connect students with our resident members. And with the pandemic, no Bible classes, right? So trying to figure out what does that look like without having Bible classes on Sunday mornings. All the big events to try and connect were out the window. In a lot of ways, I saw my role and kind of my theology of ministry have to shift towards one-on-one, right? Did a lot of time in the fall just, on my knees praying for each student by name, trying to kind of hand over them to God's hands and saying, put me where I need to be. And it was amazing, throughout the fall semester, finding myself in the right place at the right time, finding myself with the right students who were going through, a rough time, lost a loved one, parents lost a job. Life keeps going even while students are here for these 4 years, and back home, and for them, they go through a lot of different things. And so God was able to kind of use me, I feel like, to step in and walk alongside just individuals specifically, rather than having to be, coordinating these big events with, 200 students or anything like that. It was a lot more one-on-one time. And in many ways, that was a lot more meaningful throughout the fall, for sure.
Yeah. That reminds me a lot of a book that I read one time called The Crucifixion of Ministry. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but the thesis of it is just kind of get out of the way and let God do his work kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that it kind of takes a pandemic for us to kind of do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to my brother-in-law, just graduated recently, and his girlfriend, and I just kind of said, what's the general vibe of the freshmen coming in? And this was, last fall, when a lot of those, they were just now starting. And her response, I felt like, was really interesting, and I wondered what you thought about this. But she said the general feeling is just this sense of loneliness, of isolation, that normally you get to campus, especially at Harding, like any college campus, you're probably doing this, but especially at Harding, they're getting club stuff rolling, they're doing mixers, they're meeting people, like all of their classes are in person, they're getting to meet people there. And she just said, this has been nothing but lonely for them, because they just go, if they go to class, if they're not online, they're going there, they're going back to their dorm. They're going there, they're going back to their dorm. Or they're in quarantine. They get stuck in quarantine for 2 weeks by themselves all alone. Did you notice any kind of loneliness among the students and how that worked?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, they'll put on a brave face. They'll go to those mixers and stuff because Harding did try their best to do mixers and do some club stuff. A lot of it kind of had to shift over into the spring, but they'd show up and they'd put on brave faces and kind of roll with the punches. But as far as like our recruiting of freshmen in churches, it's almost non-existent. I mean, usually having a class of about 30, I have a class of about 11. And a lot of the freshmen that I've talked to don't know anyone outside of their suite. That's the big thing is like my roommate, my suite mates, we do everything together because those are the people that I know and those are the only people, I'm from College Station and these other people are from College Station. So like those are the only people I'm spending time with because I know them. And it's really hard to make any new connections. So, you think about those ones who ended up in, they went popcorn or something like that, right? Those kind of situations.
Yeah.
And they end up with suite mates or roommates that maybe they just don't vibe with, or maybe it's not a healthy situation. Like the suite mates are going through something and it's affecting their living situation. But that's who you know. And so that's kind of, I think a lot of freshmen are kind of putting up with a lot more than you normally would because their community is so shrunk down, for sure.
Yeah. So being in a community where we have a Christian university, I'm interested to know your thoughts on how campus ministry might look for a church that might be planted in a city where they have a state university. And what are your observations on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a summer with a campus ministry in Texas, actually, when I was an undergrad. Over at SFA, Stephen F. Austin University. And kind of, obviously it's the summertime, so it's not quite, in full form there at the state campus. But in many ways, campus ministries on state schools provide like a refuge, right? The idea is you're out there, you're in the world, you're trying to be a light, but every now and then you need, to get back to the well. You need to drink the water. You need to be around the people who will love you. And will encourage you, and you can feed, and then go back out, right? And in a lot of ways, it's a refuge, it's a safe spot, almost to a degree like a youth group feel. Like these are my people, they're gonna provide activities where I can be around other believers and spend time doing that. With a Christian university, it's a different feel, 100%. If we as churches are trying to put on activities and events, like we're competing with Harding University, and there's just no earthly way, like anything that Westside or Cloverdale or College or downtown is going to put on that's going to, compare to, All Club or Spring Sing or, anything that's going on campus. And so you have to kind of approach the ministry in a different way at a Christian university for sure.
Yeah, I mean, historically, our local churches, we've struggled with that because we don't know what to do with, like you said, an entirely Christian school that seems to be taking care of all of those spiritual needs, and yet there's still a need for church. There's still a need to connect with a church. So, my curiosity is how can we, as churches, what kind of role can we fill, considering they get so much from the university in terms of spiritual growth and life and community? What are some kind of things that we can do to fill a spot that maybe is left vacant or open?
Absolutely. So usually when I talk about campus ministry, the two stories from Scripture that I like to point out are the story of King Rehoboam in the Old Testament. Right after Solomon dies and Rehoboam takes the throne, he's presented with these problems in the kingdom, right? The workers say, you're working us too hard and such. And he gets two pieces of advice, right? One, he goes to his dad's friends, and the wise men kind of give him one piece of advice. And then he goes to his friends, like the young guys, right? And he gets advice from them, right? Yeah. And so ultimately he ends up going with the advice from his friends, right? And things don't go so well, right? Yeah. When you think about Harding and when you think about the Christian campus, they're getting 15 hours a week with an older presence, with a teacher in the room, right? But the rest of the week on campus is mostly spent with their peers. So they're getting encouragement, they're getting community, they're getting spiritual growth through devotionals and such or in chapel, but they don't interact a lot with older, mature Christians. And in that way, a lot of the advice that they're getting when they're going through crisis or when they're going through struggles are from their peers, which isn't necessarily, as Scripture shows us, isn't necessarily the best advice, right? And so there's definitely a role for older, mature Christians in these students' lives, and that's where the church steps in, right? Being in a community, that's one of the reasons that God gave us the church, right, is being in community with a family of intergenerational Christians who can give better advice, who can be a better example of how is it that we go through life, that we walk through life in our Christian faith. How do I parent well, going forward? How do I center my relationship, my marriage on Christ? How do I do finances? How do I balance work and life and raising kids and tithing and serving, going forward? These guys, they may not have been thinking about it when they were in youth group, right? But by the time they're in college, they see it. It's right around the corner. Especially by the time they get to junior, senior year, they're starting to think, all right, I've got a serious girlfriend. We're thinking about getting married. What does that look like? And and they need the church there for that reason. The other story that I like to point out is the story of Apollos with Priscilla and Aquila. Here's a young man who has gotten kind of a gist, right, of the gospel, and he's got a heart for service, and he's got a lot of passion and a lot of energy, and he's going out and he's doing what he can, right, with the tools that he's been given. And Priscilla and Aquila hear him, and they realize that he doesn't quite understand the full picture, right, and so he needs some more education. Well, Harding, in a lot of ways, steps in and gives that fuller education, but that's also the church's job. The church has a responsibility to take these young people and give them the training they need, and then send them out, right? Apollos, Priscilla and Aquila train him, and then they send him. And so we have this incredible mission field that the world is coming to our doorstep, right? This is the lifeblood of the church nationwide, even internationally, right here in our backyard. And so as a church, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are taking these young men and women who have passion and who have energy and who want to do something for the kingdom, and making sure that they understand what they need to do next, right? Where are the gaps in their knowledge? Harding, in many ways, is going to fill them with textual and theological training, absolutely. But what about ecclesiological training, right? What about the life of the church? What about the people who usher people to their seats on Sunday morning, who count the money behind the scenes, who flip the slides during worship, who teach Bible classes for 3-year-olds, who organize, the moving of the widows, stuff into the nursing home, right? Those are all integral parts of our family and community life that these people, these students, in a lot of ways, haven't been asked to step up and start doing yet. And so that's in a lot of ways a role for the church, is to teach them, how do you become part of the church? Because when you graduate Harding and you're used to, churches of 400, 500, you're used to, chapel with thousands of people in there worshiping, and then you get a job in middle of nowhere, Kansas. No offense, Kansas.
Every single person from Kansas is like, hey, I'm not listening to this anymore.
But you end up in these churches that are 100 people, maybe, and suddenly you're being tapped on the shoulder. Hey, can you lead singing this week? Hey, can you lead prayer? Hey, we need someone to teach Bible class. And you've never been asked to do that this whole time because you're in a church that's so full of mature Christians that have been doing it instead, and you've just been able to kind of ride along behind. Suddenly, you're not equipped. And we're robbing the rest of the churches of that if we're not training these young people during the most, important times of their life when they've got all this passion and energy.
So what would be your strategy in approaching that? Because traditionally, people don't like, people struggle with connecting with anyone who's different from them, whether that's by gender, nationality, or age, especially in the church. We talk about sort of this multi-generational type ministry and connecting with people, but it's not any church anywhere struggles with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially when you feel like all of these things that you, like you said, a normal college campus that's not a Christian university, that they feel this sense of, I need a spiritual, thing. I need a well to come back to, like you said. But here they're kind of getting that. So it makes the job even harder to try to connect them with people who are of a different generation and do have all of those things to share with them. And so it's like, how do we do that as churches? Like, what are some effective ways to really get college kids to see, A, I need that, but B, it's so valuable for me. Like I want it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just point out as well, one of the issues is Harding's been here for a long time, and churches here in this area have struggled with that for long enough that I've run into quite a few people who have kind of got these burns, right? They've reached out, they've tried to make relationships. You guys understand, right? They've tried to make relationships, and the student just continuously didn't show up, over and over and over, because you're dealing with 19-year-olds. They're not at the most mature age yet. And what I think is important to know is, like, at any age, people want to be wanted, right? And that's just the fundamental truth. And especially when you're a young person who's in a new place among new people, trying to figure out how you're going to fit in, how you're going to connect, you want to be wanted. Yeah. And so one of the biggest things is that as Christians and as the church family here, we have to let them know that we do want them, right? We have to keep our doors open. We have to continuously give out invitations. And you're right, because they're getting so much on campus, they may not see the value of that right away. And a lot of times when you talk to them, they want to be connected. They really do. They want to be connected, but then there's that Tuesday night, hey, you want to get dinner tonight? But then they've got like 3 other invitations from their other friends, to go do, volleyball or go to Little Rock or, who knows what. And you're asking them to make the mature decision, right? Like, come spend time so I can, feed into you, right? And they're not going to see it that way every time. And so there's a certain amount of patience and there's a certain amount of sacrifice on our part, right? One of the things that, kind of a wake-up call that I've given a few of our mentors over at Cloverdale is, we follow a man who went to the cross, who came down and gave his invitation to so many people who rejected him. And in the end, ended up suffering and dying. And you're upset because someone didn't show up for dinner. And I know those feelings are real, but we have to recognize that we are dealing with almost baby Christians, if not baby Christians, then toddler Christians, right?
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And so they're not going to know what's good for them. They're going to want the candy. They're not going to want the meat. They're not going to want their veggies, necessarily. Yeah. And so we have to keep asking them, and keep inviting them to take it.
And that's not a slight on the students at all, because it's
it's where we were.
It's where we still are sometimes, where we don't even acknowledge sometimes that we need something more than where we are. Maybe you hit your 30s and you're like, I've got a family. I know what's going on in the world, but it doesn't matter. Like no matter where you are, you think you know more, but you really need a lot more than you have. Yeah. And so I hear you saying the sense of be resilient.
Be resilient. That's a great way to put it. Absolutely. Be resilient. Have what is it Philippians says is have this mind that is yours in Christ Jesus. And he talks about putting the needs of others before yourself, right? And so, I have a need to be wanted as well. And it hurts when those students don't seem to want me, right? I've been, as a campus minister, I've been burned, absolutely. But looking to the interest of others before yourself, that what you have and what the church has is good for them. So you have to continuously try to give it to them. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So in a community where there is a Christian university like Searcy, that I guess plays a part in why there are so many churches. I mean, there's a church on every corner for these students to choose from. How can multiple churches effectively minister on a single college campus?
Oh, that's a good question. Absolutely.
Well, we have a bunch. There's 1 or 2 in Searcy.
There's just a couple. A lot of times I feel like there's this mentality of almost competition with each other, and I don't think that's a healthy attitude.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think, an important foundation that we have to get through our heads is if you look at enrollment numbers, and I know Harding has kind of struggled to get enrollment some. I don't think that's a secret, but even with the numbers that they have, there are more college students than our churches know what to do with. Like if every single student on that campus decided to go to church, we'd be overwhelmed. We wouldn't have space for them.
That's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Too.
Crazy to think about, absolutely. And so it almost kind of helps us that they kind of rotate through their, this person is saying, okay, I need it this week, but the next week they're not feeling it, but someone else is going to feel it that week, So we kind of rotate some, which is kind of helpful to a certain degree. But I do think it's important as churches to recognize that we can't handle all of them. No one church is going to have all of those students at all, and so. Knowing that and knowing the diverse backgrounds these students are coming from. Some of these students aren't going to agree or believe everything that you believe, and some of these students aren't going to be comfortable and thrilled by the way you do church, right? Because that's not their background. And so recognizing that having multiple churches throughout Searcy is actually a blessing because we're able to engage with different students in different ways. And that way, not just one portion of the population is being served, right? Think about, these, kids who would go to downtown, kids who would go to highway, kids who would go to college. If only college existed, those kids who would normally go to highway, go to Cloverdale, go to West Side, aren't being served, and they just go 4 years without church. Well, what does that do for your faith?
Yeah.
Right? How strong of a Christian are you going to be after 4 years if you haven't had a church to engage with, or if the church that you're trying to engage with isn't meeting your needs, or isn't meeting you on an intellectual, theological level that you're hoping for? And so I think that's a big part of it is recognizing that that we all share a responsibility here, and in many ways we complement each other. I have had multiple conversations with students who, have tried to get plugged into Cloverdale, and it's just not for them. It's a struggle to get them out of their beds on Sunday mornings and to church. And I sit down and talk with them, and they're like, well, there's this aspect I'm not a big fan of, or it just doesn't quite feel right. I'm like, okay, fine. Have you tried this place? Have you tried this other place? It sounds like maybe you want to go to downtown. It sounds like maybe you want to go to West Side. And I've recommended students there. And then where I think the dream and the vision is for our churches here is to be in enough community together and engaged in this ministry and mission together that when I recommend someone to West Side, I can reach out to you two and say, hey, this student is supposed to be there on Sunday. Can you make sure that they're there? And so there's a sense of accountability within our church幸Real quick, and I know I'm talking a lot, but
no, that's why.
I guess that's true. One of the things that I was saying from the pulpit a couple months ago is when parents come and drop off their kids, there's inevitably this sense of nervousness on mom and dad's part. You're dropping your kids off for the first time. Are they going to know how to eat? Are they going to bathe? Are they going to be able to clothe themselves while they're gone?
Every single freshman guy just got offended. It's
exactly.
Like, I bathed 2 days ago.
That's right. But mom and dad are nervous, and what if something goes wrong? What if they get hurt? I'm leaving them there all by themselves. Well, they're not leaving them there by themselves, right? And we as a church, and when I say the church, I'm talking globally now. We have to have a sense of ownership of our kids. Yeah. Because these kids that are coming from California, from Kentucky, from Michigan to Harding University are our kids as well, right? They're not those churches' kids. They're our kids. Yeah. And we have to have a sense of ownership in that and a sense of love and responsibility towards those children in faith and help grow the church as a whole. And so we can't do that if we're feeling like we're in competition, right? We all have to take a part in the responsibility.
Yeah. Campus ministry, and it seems like it's not very prevalent amongst churches, at least in our community, which is ironic because, we have a ton of churches here. But I can only, think of a couple of churches that even have a dedicated person to campus ministry. And so I was curious if you could kind of explain how you defend the need for having a dedicated person, on staff that is for campus ministry.
Besides the fact that you already pointed out, if all the students showed up, it suddenly we would not be able to
that's a strong argument.
There's a ton of them, so why would you not?
Absolutely. And different churches are going to have different experiences. If by some miracle every student, next Sunday decide to show up, we want to be ready for that, right? If students suddenly decide they all want to flood into, Little Foothills Auditorium, Foothills has an incredible campus ministry going on right now. It's kind of under the radar, but they're doing an awesome job with their college kids. Cool. But they're still not quite ready for an influx of, every student to show up all of a sudden. And so one of the things that we talked about with the elders when I was looking at coming into my role is we were getting about 150 students or so on a Sunday morning. That's during worship service, you kind of look and you have your sections right in the auditorium, and there's usually the college section where they're all sitting together with their friends and everything. It's like a third of our congregation almost is college students, and yet, in many ways they're not connected. They're not engaged with what's going on. The elders don't necessarily know their names because there's 150 of them and they move as one giant mob, And so I used to kind of joke that I was the border collie for Christ, right? Like they're the herd, and my job was to kind of run around the edges and make sure that nobody runs off too much. Well, more recently, I've kind of seen myself as as kind of the person who breaks up the herd. Like I got to get into the middle of them and send them out so that they can connect with other people. And it's going to take a designated person to do that. No one's going to naturally do that. Yeah. It's going to take someone who is intentional about tracking down these kids in the craziness of their schedules between club stuff and classes and going home on weekends and, friends to Little Rock and all that sort of thing. It takes kind of a hunting mentality, right, to go down and find these kids and bring them in to the church community. And it's going to take somebody specific to do that. Yeah, for sure.
And that's so helpful because I know that a sentiment that has been felt before by probably every church here is this sentiment of we struggle with college-age students because of this sort of transience that they just naturally have, where they are floating around and they're like, well, even if they did stay here in one church, they're only here for 4 years. And so there's this struggle that every church has kind of gone through about how do we engage them without feeling the sense of like, well, they're going to be gone.
They're going to be
gone. As soon as we figure it out, they're going to be
right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's realizing we're not just training them to connect them for 4 years here and see what they can do within our churches. But like you said earlier, it's that sending out. They're going to go out, and we want them to be
absolutely
faithful Christians first, and active members of a church that support them wherever they end up, so that they don't go from this like, I've got a wealth of opportunities to grow my faith to now I have to choose to go to that. Absolutely. I have to go get it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And for every senior that you send out, there's a freshman that's coming in, freshly shaved, baby faced little guy coming in who doesn't know, maybe his voice has changed, maybe it hasn't, and he doesn't know his shape notes, he can't lead singing, but that's where we get engaged. That's where we start, walking alongside him. And just to dream about where our churches could be, we talk about sending almost as a passive action, right? They leave us and we're still sitting here as if we suddenly don't have any connection or relationship with them anymore because it was just 4 years, right? Well, why was it just 4 years? Why isn't it 5, 10, 15, the rest of your lives with these students? If you are discipling them, if you are mentoring them, if you've been teaching them, why aren't you engaged with them when they're starting to have kids? If we are really concerned about the fallout of our young people from church right now, when you look at the numbers, it's just terrifying where our church is headed as far as young people dropping away from the faith constantly. There's definitely a sense of responsibility to youth ministers to prepare kids better. But why aren't we going out and finding those people who are leaving and making sure that they stay engaged? When they go to middle of nowhere, Kansas, no offense, Kansas again.
You got to pick a different state.
When they go to middle of nowhere, Nevada, I don't know. Why aren't we using our connections? I mean, this is Harding University, right? This is Searcy. We've got people from all over the place here. We have connections all over the world here. Mm-hmm. Why aren't we connecting them with churches wherever they're going? Yeah. And now part of the problem is that we don't have a relationship with them before they leave. Right.
Yeah.
But if we were to engage them now, create a relationship with them for 4 years, and when they say, "Hey, I just got a job in Chicago," we celebrate with them. We praise God for that. Mm-hmm. We help prepare them for what it's going to look like going to Chicago. And one of the things that needs to look like is, "Hey, here's a list of churches. Like, why don't you get engaged? I know someone at this church. Why don't you go by and get dinner with them? They'd love to meet you." Because those churches are starving for young people. Yeah. They're so excited when young people show up on their doorstep, right, on a Sunday morning. And so part of our job is helping create those connections and those relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. So, because to me, when you're losing students, especially if you talk about in the course of someone's life, let's say they've grown up in the church. They've been a part of an active youth group. They've had a good experience with church. Where they're probably going to drop faith is in that transition period between that senior year of high school and the freshman year of university. And we have a responsibility, not only as churches receiving freshmen, to try to keep that from happening, to try to engage them and connect with them. But I like what you're saying about once they're done here, our responsibility has not ended. It would be of great benefit to the church at large to say, how do we connect them with someone where they're going? How do we do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that, I think we as a culture have stopped understanding is this idea of fishers of men. Fishing today does not look like fishing back then, right? Fishing today is a very passive activity. You sit, you put your line out, you wait for something to nibble. And in a lot of ways, that's how our churches have started to treat college students, is we sit back, we have our sign out, we have our college class there. If they wanted it, they would show up. Mm. But instead, fishing back then was you got in a boat, you rowed out, you took nets, you threw them in, you pulled them back into your boat, you threw it again, and you kept doing it until you finally caught something. Like you went to the fish as much as you possibly can and as hard as you possibly could to get as much as you could. And as fishers of men, we're called to pursue these college students, right? And that's a big part of it, for sure.
I'm interested to know in trying to convince maybe churches to think about having a dedicated person for campus ministry. Like, what would a day in the life of a campus ministry, the shoes of a campus ministry look like?
If the church is going, what does that guy do? Is he just having coffee on campus all day? What is that?
Well, honestly, that's part of it. That's part of my. You just took like 4 hours of my day away from me right there.
Coffee, got it.
Coffee, okay. That's it. Which is really hard because I don't drink coffee, but I drink water while they're enjoying their lattes. But no, there's a certain amount of a lot of my day looks like waking up in the morning, meeting with staff at the church building, talking about how we can integrate the youth ministry, the preaching, our teachers, our education ministry for our little kids. I'm an advocate. I'm a voice for the college students in those meetings, saying how can we engage these young people into what we're already doing as a church family. And so that's a big part of my job is just advocating in meetings where they would normally get forgotten. A lot of it's tracking down these students. It is getting coffee. This morning I sat down and I prayed and I thought about who are students I haven't talked to in a while and who I know are going through some transitions recently because I'm engaged with their life, so I know the transitions they're going with. And so, you shoot some texts and you say, hey, let's get lunch this week. Hey, let's get coffee this week. Hey, can we go to Sonic sometime? And sometimes they respond, sometimes they don't. That's the thing is when you have 150 students or more, one may not reply, but, 2 more might, or 5 may not reply, but you got the one, And what we need to recognize is if that one person is reaching back and saying, I want to engage with an older, mature Christian, especially someone in my role who they know I'm the minister. Like they know I have an agenda, right? When I walk into this
Right.
in time together, it means that they're searching for something, and so I try to provide that. Organizing our Bible classes on Sunday morning, a lot of that is coordinating with teachers and trying to figure out how, what do students need during this time of their life, and what kind of lessons do they need to hear. I teach the freshman class personally myself, so I spend a lot of time getting ready for that. And then one of our best things that we just started is a thing called life groups. So life groups is basically, I got up in front of the congregation over Christmas break and I put out a challenge. I said, can we engage with a group of 3 to 5 students for at least an hour once a week? That's all I'm asking, is 1 hour. I was like, that's a time in front of your TV is all. It's like sacrifice an hour of news, an hour on your phone, and engage with a young person. And then we put out signups, and we got a good amount of response. I would say we probably have 50, 60 students who engaged with that. And so what I try to do is I try to follow up with our life group leaders after that, because they're the ones now spending an hour a week. So I can't get to everybody. I'm just one person. But I've got Carl McClarty's spending time every Wednesday with five junior guys going through the wisdom lit, right? They're going through Proverbs and Psalms and talking about it together. I've got a woman who meets with 5 young ladies, which is a big help for me as a single guy. How do we engage with the young women in this ministry? And so in a lot of ways, our women at Cloverdale have really stepped up and helped out with that. But this is a way that I can check in with them and see, how are people doing? Does anyone need any, engagement and special attention or special prayers at this time? And things are going great so far. Empowering
and equipping your membership to help out in this way.
Great way to put it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very good.
Man, that's such great advice. This is fantastic.
Appreciate
it's
that.
Exactly what I think every church needs to be considering, because it's a strangely underserved by the churches, the college student.
I like to call them the hot potato, kind of. There's a certain amount where Harding thinks that the churches are providing, care and counseling, and especially in times of crisis, they're like, oh, the churches will take care of these students. And then the churches are thinking, oh, no, Harding's going to take care of them and be there, and the professors are going to engage with them when care and crisis and all that. And so just keep getting passed back and forth. And finally, one of us needs to just grab on and do it.
Yeah. Because they deeply need it. I mean, if there's an age at which a lot of things are going to change about your life, you're making all these huge decisions and you're meeting lots of people. You may be meeting people that you may spend the rest of your life with. Like there's so many things going on that's like, if we're not reaching out and trying to give some wisdom and love and care to these students, then we're missing a group of people who desperately need that.
Absolutely. And as well as like when I say crisis, that's a very specific term for me. This age group goes through so much. When kids go to college, especially if they're the youngest, that is the prime time in their parents' marriage when if they've been thinking about getting divorced, they're empty nesters now. That is a high rate of divorce is when the kids go to college. And so now you've got kids who are hundreds of miles away from home dealing with their family falling apart back there, and they're supposed to focus on finals, right? They're supposed to focus on making friends, and they don't know if they have a home to go back to at Christmas time, right? The suicide rate in this country, our suicide rate, the suicide is the second leading cause of death for 18 to 25-year-olds. That is astounding, right? Yeah. And we, you may not be equipped necessarily to handle that yourself, but there are those of us who are equipped. But we need to know that it's happening, right? That kids are going through these crises so that we can engage them, and that's only going to happen through relationship. Otherwise, they're going to fall through the cracks, and they're going to go through these crises alone.
Yeah.
So it takes all those arms kind of reaching out and being points of contact for them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So for a college student that's listening to this podcast, is there somewhere that they could go to look to see how they can get plugged in? whether they're a Harding student or elsewhere? Is there kind of a whether it's a website or social media, where can students go to?
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, Harding has been trying their best recently to connect. I believe the Office of Church Relations has a page on the Harding website that kind of tells service times and Bible class times and what each church is doing. If I'd thought about it, I would have had that link ready to go for y'all, but I don't remember.
We'll get it in the show notes.
Yeah. Great, awesome. So that in itself is important. Every church has a website, or especially the ones who are trying to engage college students. A lot of them have an Instagram, right? I think we have a campus ministry Instagram ourselves. I know that downtown does as well. In college, the Rock House does. And so just watching those and engaging in the opportunities that get posted there is a big one. Okay. And really, guys, there's no better way to get engaged than showing up on Sunday morning. Showing up on Sunday morning and going up to someone who's clearly a Cersei resident member and just saying, hey, this is my first time. I want to get involved. Right. And how do I get involved? And if they can't help you, they can at least connect you with the person who can. Good. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Philip, the last thing we like to ask everybody, all of our guests so far, has been two things. What's a piece of scripture that has really kind of impacted you lately? And what's maybe a book that you've read that's impacted you lately?
Absolutely. And so the scripture that has really just been on my mind for the past year really has been 2 Timothy 1, verse 7. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. And in so many ways over this past year, right, there's so much to fear. There's so much to fear. The pandemic, the politics, the culture shifts, right? It's just constant. And I think it's important to remember that as a church, we don't have a spirit of fear, right? We have a spirit of self-control and of love. We're not reactive, we're proactive as a church, and that's important. The books that I'm reading, unfortunately, because I'm in grad school, I don't have a ton of time to read on my own, right? You sent me that text. You sent me that text being like, what have you read? I was like, biblical archaeology books? Like, do you really want to talk about that?
Hey, don't offend all the biblical archaeologists
No offense, Dr. Manor.
Dr. Manor's like, I love these
personally. But since the pandemic started, I've been slowly, trying, whenever I do have time to myself, making my way through books such as there's one called Hurting with God by a Glen Pemberton, who it goes through the Lament Psalms and specifically talks about how do we as Christians deal with hard times and how do we deal with the problem of evil as Christians, and how do we engage God during those times. And after I finished that, I just picked up recently Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering by Tim Timothy Keller. And I'm only about 2 or 3 chapters in there, so don't ask me too many questions about that. But, it's a time where when we see so much destruction, so much hurt in the world right now, that's so far out of our control and out of anyone's control, really. Especially my young guys, in the campus ministry have started asking those questions, right? Like, where's God? Like, what was the purpose behind this, right? Does God have a purpose for letting this happen? Spending a lot of time in Job recently, and wrestling with those questions right now. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Philip, as we kind of wrap things up here, we'll just let everybody know if you have any questions or comments, things you'd like to share with us, or something you'd like to ask Philip specifically, you can always send an email over to questions@wschurch.net, and we would love to pass those on to Philip or read those here. But let us know what you think of the podcast so far, and share any questions you might have for Philip. We'll get those to him. But Philip, thank you for being on the show today. We appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we always close off by letting everybody know that we love you and we hope you're having a wonderful day.
Love you guys.